God bless everybody today. It's May 23rd of 2023. This is a Daniel 8 and 10 update. There's a lot happening. Let's get right into it. First thing I want to talk about is the election in Turkey. Erdogan is in a runoff position against his Kurdish opponent. He got just under 50% of the vote in the original election, and so this forced a runoff. But I even made a comment in the last video that I believe Erdogan, due to prophecy, and how I've shown you that prophecy, that he would win. And now the third place candidate that had the extra 5% is now basically supporting Erdogan. And so I believe that Erdogan will easily win this election, and he will then go against this Kurdish uh, faction of or group of people. Not only does he think they're terrorists, but they ran against him in the election, and if he wins, he will retaliate against them, I believe. And that election will happen on May 28th. So once you see that happen and Erdogan gains power again, then we'll have to see whether he does this land operation invasion into Syria and Iraq shortly after that. I believe that he will. I believe he'll retaliate through this Operation Claw Sword that he started about a year or so ago. And that this front that he started, this Operation Claw Sword, actually initiated on November 20th of 22. And so he's been waiting for some time to actually do an operation where he crosses the border and completes a 30-mile buffer zone and actually invades into these two countries of Syria and Iraq. He's been talking about this for some time. I thought he was going to do it earlier, but then he had those two earthquakes hit, and that stopped him from doing anything until after the election. But I believe that that will finalize once he gets reelected in the next 5 days or so. On the Israeli front, there's a lot happening. Israel is doubled, at least based on Fox News. The defense minister in Israel has claimed that they doubled their strikes against Iranian targets in Syria. Also seen a number of strikes against the Damascus airport. And also you need to watch Erbil, because that's the Kurdish capital in Iraq, as well as we have a green zone there. And so these are areas that are going to be intensified around Iran. Iran's been building defensive positions or offensive positions actually in Syria for some time, and they've also implemented a lot of this potential weapons that they're bringing in and supplementing Hezbollah, Hamas, and all these guys through this relief effort, through this Turkish earthquake. So all these guys were coming in doing relief, but this isn't all just relief. It's actually people bringing in weapons, and a lot of players out here not necessarily helping the cause. They're actually instigating and creating more of a problem. So we're starting to see a lot of tensions rise. Hezbollah just put a massive display of show of force in Lebanon in the last few days. They're getting ready for a major attack. I've been talking about this. So far they've launched maybe 1,500 rockets, but they have maybe 150,000 rockets. And these guys are ideology driven, and so you can read the articles and different things like that. I'm just going over the basic, what's happening out here, how it affects you, and how it's going to affect the Bible, and how this is going to transpire into Daniel 8 as we move forward and Turkey starts to get into this. And if you go into Daniel 8 and 10, as I've talked to many times, Israel doesn't get the job done. They fail in the ability to stop Iran or the Persians. And they have to recruit from Turkey and Egypt and all these other places, as the prophets told us. But the prophets told us that this would end up badly for them. And so, as we're starting to see, the fortunes of Israel are starting to fail. They're under massive judgment. They're under God's judgment right now. This is going to end up in an extremely bad place. It indicates that 2/3 of the Jews in Jerusalem and Israel could potentially perish in this judgment. I've talked about how the paradigm tells us that this could happen in the next 6 months, and how October is a potential devastating six seal event on the world, and how that's going to affect us completely, and how you need to prepare for that potential exchange, and how we move into that trumpet phase just shortly after that by the end of the year. And so things are going to change rapidly. And I mean rapidly at this point. We're under the 1600-day mark, as I've indicated on my paradigm, to the Feast of Trumpets, and what I believe are what people call the Harpazo, the Rapture, or whatever you guys want to call that, the taking away of the body of Jesus. But all people are raised at that time, dead and living, and we're all judged at that time in front of the white throne. That's what he tells us. All people. But that happens at the seventh trumpet. Anyway, so Hezbollah is starting to show their side. Hamas has already shown their side. These guys are going to join, and Iran is backing all these guys and bringing in massive amounts of weapons through this Turkish relief effort, and they can't stop them all. They've been trying to, but a lot of the stuff's getting through. And you can see Israel's been ramping up these attacks on these convoys and things like that to try to stop this inflow of weapons and stuff before it gets out of hand over there. But they're not going to be able to control it. And God tells us this is supposed to happen. So Erdogan is doing a lot of reconnaissance. He's doing some basic shelling on the front line, nothing major right now because he's concentrating on the election. He doesn't want to show he's being hostile at this moment. But if you go look at the Pergamash, which are the Kurdish, they're unifying right now. They know they're getting ready for an attack, and they're telling their people that they need to get ready. They know this is coming, and they know once Erdogan is elected, because they're pretty sure he's going to get elected, I'm sure too at this point, that this is going to unleash on them fairly soon. And so we're watching, Turkey's always working against the PKK and these Kurdish factions, the Pergamash groups and different things like that. I'm probably saying them wrong because I'm not really good at saying some of these words. But anyway, I show you where all this is found, and please don't get hung up on spelling. It's the message that matters here, and we need to understand what's coming up in the next 6 months to a year so we can prepare the masses for this as it starts to unfold in front of us. And I'm not going to go too deep into this. I just want to show you what I'm seeing so that you can see how this forms and how this will probably finish out in the next month and a half. I've been talking about this for a little while. It has been moving out. I talked about how June was going to be a bad month, and potentially we're going to see a lot of devastation in the markets around the 4th of July, and how a lot of our independence is going to be taken away based on what the Fed's actions have been and how they're manipulating the markets, and how the bond market's fallen out. The bond market is telling the Fed to stop, pivot, and cut because it's dropped 100 basis points, but it's gapping back up. I noticed it gapped up quite a bit, and we're back up around 65 point gap spread between the 2 and 10 inversion wise. This is going to spread out again, and when you hit those 100-point inversions, just like we did before, we lost a number of banks. And I keep talking about when these spreads happen, and you're going to see that 2-year go down, and it's reverse in bonds. So when the bonds, you think it goes up, it's actually moving down. It's hard to explain to some people, but basically, when if you look at it this way, when the banks are giving the Fed money at 5%, but they can only loan at higher or longer terms, and those terms are at a lower rate than the 2 year, and they're at like 3.5, they're losing money. Every time they give a loan out, they lose money when they do this, and they can't make money on these loans. And so you're going to watch these defaults start to occur because the banks are underwater on all these properties. When that 100-point spread occurred and you saw that 2 year bond drop out from 5 to 4, everybody went underwater at that moment, and that caused a lot of problems in the markets. And this is why the banks are falling out, because they can't deal with not only the outflows but the amount of loss of value of properties and things when these bonds fell out. It just wiped out their balance sheets and they can't recover. And so you're seeing consolidation of banks. They're talking about potentially 700 or more banks are insolvent at this point, and you're going to start to watch these regional banks fall out. But what I wanted to show you on this chart is fairly simple. I talked about this head and shoulder pattern forming, and it's still forming. We are actually walking into the end of the head and getting ready to move down. This was the first shoulder. You've got a head. It's going to drop down just below this shoulder, reform the next shoulder, and then really drop out. And as you can see on these last two drops, how far it can potentially fall. But I wanted to show you something that gives me a little different perspective, because I think you have to look at the charts differently at times. So this is a picture of my phone, and you can see it looks a lot different than the chart I just showed you. And you can see very clearly this head and shoulder pattern is forming, and we're getting ready to drop down into this neckline. And you can, it's amazing that graph line is right along the neckline there. So if you look at that, I've been talking about this for a month or a month and a half now, maybe a couple months. I don't remember when I made the first video, that this would drop below the 20,000 because it's moving down. The trajectory is down. Okay, so when your trend line is down, everything is going to slant this way. And so this is going to come down. It's going to drop just below 20 grand. I believe then it will come up and form the next shoulder, which would be the right shoulder in this case, hit around the 24 because it'll be just below this because you're moving in a downward trend, and then it will fall out completely. And then I go back to the Wyckoff charts that I talked about before, where you hit the spring and it falls out completely, and you end up in that below 10,000 Bitcoin, potentially below 1,000, potentially even negative Bitcoin that I've been talking about for some time. The fallout on this is going to be extreme, and it's going to revolve around the Fed raising these rates again. So the conflict you're seeing here is because the bond market runs everything. It's a much bigger market than any other market out here. It's 3 or 4 times larger than the stock market, and so it controls everything. And so when the 2-year bond fell out, the markets signaled to the Fed that it should stop and cut because the 2-year bond fell out, and it should follow it. But they're not, because Jay has 2 mandates. He has to control inflation, and he has to control employment. And he's not doing either of them, even though they've raised 500 basis points in a year and a half. Okay, this is unprecedented. This has never happened except for when Volcker did it back, and he raised it like 12% at one time, and it shocked the market into stupid. He is not creating any of his mandates. He's not getting his unemployment down, or he's not creating unemployment. He wants that 4.5 magic number unemployment, which will end up being 5.5 because it always doubles when it ends up at the end. And he's not creating any headway on inflation because core inflation hasn't moved. It's still at 5.5 to 6. And if you look at marginal inflation month to month, it's up 0.4. So they're not gaining any ground. And so that's why Bullard with the Fed, which is one of the top hawks, is telling us that he thinks maybe we actually should raise 2 more times this year. I talked about how they were going to raise this rate again in June 12th, 13th. I think it's on the 12th. They were going to raise it 2.5, and they might have to keep moving forward, but they should be cutting these 2-year bonds falling out. But he can't because he has no credibility if he doesn't keep continuing to fill his mandate of we have to create maximum pain and we have to create unemployment where people are losing their jobs in millions, and we have to get inflation back to 2%, which is an impossibility in this environment. So I just want you to realize that this head and shoulder is going to form. We are moving down into a pattern that is getting ready to go into that neckline. I thought you could see it better on the phone because it just shows the pattern much easier. And you can see in the next 2 weeks, walking into the 12th of June, how this could really drop out. We could see a small rebound and then a complete collapse. I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't know if the markets can completely collapse. I think they break and then they regurgitate and then they pull back together. But whether the dollar will survive through this, whether even Bitcoin and some of these currencies will hold up. I believe Bitcoin will because it's considered the golden crypto and it's an institutionalized monetary exchange that's globalized at this point. It's been out there for over a decade. So I don't think they can totally collapse Bitcoin, but I believe a lot of the stable coins could fall out and you could potentially see most, if not all of them, except for like Ethereum, Doge, and some of the really XRP, a few of these other ones might hold up. But a lot of these, they're just basic tokens with no value, and they're printing this stuff out of thin air, so they're not worth anything anyway. So just something to keep an eye on. Keep an eye on Israel. Keep an eye on the Turkish elections. Now that Erdogan has gained the support of the basically the other faction that had any vote base whatsoever, because the other guy had like 0.5, so he's just not going to matter in the election cycle in this. He doesn't have enough support. Even though Erdogan only really needs 0.5% of the vote to actually create the 50% or higher threshold. So he's going to win this easily. And then he has ultimate power to basically do whatever he wants. And he's going to because he has been for some time anyway. And when the Kurds stepped in the ring, it caused him a lot of problems. And I will guarantee you, if I know this man the way I think I know him, he's going to retaliate, and he's going to retaliate in a very extreme method. Putin, all these dictators do this in this specific way. They eliminate their challengers, their competition. And I believe Erdogan will do the same. God bless everybody. Find the open door. Find Jesus. Things are going to ramp up and accelerate tremendously in the next few months here. And so you need to prepare. And if you have not been putting food away, please put some cans of food away. Find some ability to find clean, fresh drinking water close to you. We've had that conversation about carrying water. If you've ever carried water at 8 pounds a gallon, you'll know that you can't do that for long. So you have to find a source close to you so that you have the ability to take care of yourself and your families. be prepared. I always look at it this way. My motto is prepare for the worst and hope for the best. God bless. Have a great night.